You give us the sign when you're ready.
Informally, thank you all for coming, and sorry to those who don't have seats. Maybe we can request a few chairs. We appreciate your understanding with the size.
Why don't you also say you want to sit on as well? Is that? Doesn't he want?
Marcus, yeah. You're good to go.
Okay, I'm good to go. Yeah, I've been co-coordinating this session with Seygun, who's sitting there. Why don't you sit up on the front as well? And I won't say much. I mean, the hard lifting has been done by Brian from the IGF Secretariat and by Martin, who will be our moderator. Just maybe a few words on the history and where this comes from. The past 2 years, we had 2 best practice forums dealing with related issues. One was with CSIRTs and the other one with unsolicited communication. Martin was involved in all of them, and so he has the history. And this year, the experts involved, we had discussions from early this year onwards how we should maybe continue. And the idea was maybe we should broaden the scope a bit. And this is also in line with the resolution that extended the mandate of the IGF. It has a fairly strong emphasis on cybersecurity. So the experts concluded that it would be good to have a slightly broader look at this issue, and Martin will say more on the definitional aspects of cybersecurity, as means different things to different people. But another important part of this discussion was this was conceived not as a single project. It was not the idea we solve all the problems and issues by the end of this year, but that this is a multi-year project, and the IGF, I think, can have a prominent place in this discussion. There is an increased concern of governments, and in the UN framework, cybersecurity is discussed in the first committee. The first committee is the committee dealing with disarmament and peace issues, and that is a so-called global group of experts, and that is a government-only commission, a government-only group of experts. And we think it informs the government experts if they actually discuss with people, technical experts, and also civil society. And we hope that in future we have also this interaction, and the IGF clearly has a role to play in this aspect and can inform also governments. And with that, I hand over to Martin. Please run the show and take it away.
Thank you very much, Marcus, and thank you all for being here today. As Marcus mentioned, this Best Practices Forum very much came out of a set of best practices forums that took place over the last few years. And one of the core things that we learned during those forums was that it was actually very difficult to get multi-stakeholder engagement around the topic of incident response teams. During those discussions, we ended up having a lot of incident response teams around the room. We did also have other stakeholder communities, but quite often there were issues around definition and what is it really that an incident response team does. So we worked for 2 years to address those, and this year we actually wanted to widen the scope a little bit and really review what it means for different stakeholders to work on cybersecurity together. Cybersecurity has typically been a topic where governments take the lead in many cases, and that has always been met with some concern by some of the other stakeholder groups. And the participants to this BPF saw this as an opportunity to engage a wider audience and really get everyone around the table to talk about something that's really important to our social life, our economies, and also the way that the internet as a technology operates. So I greatly appreciate that this year we actually have a standing room only session, and all of you have come. Very quick administrative overview of what we'll be covering today, and I don't know if we can present the slides for a second. But I'd like to walk through how we will spend the next hour and a half. The first 15 minutes are really this, a quick introduction to the BPF, where did it come from, what has it done. Then we'll spend about 15 minutes talking about the current draft and the comments that were received from various stakeholder groups, and I'll actually ask Brian to walk us through the process a bit, as he did a lot of the hard work at getting everything together for this session. We'll spend about 20 minutes giving all of the speakers time to provide an opening statement on how they see cybersecurity within the IGF, how they see cross-stakeholder group communication and coordination happening. And we'll also have input from Matthew Shears from a feeder session that took place earlier in the week. Then we'll have about half an hour for group discussion and questions and answers. So if you have particular input that you haven't been able to provide to the review platform or that you haven't been able to bring up in the mailing lists, today is a great place to actually bring those questions forward. And then finally, we'll do a wrap-up and look at the next steps for the Best Practices Forum in future years. I'll actually hand it over to Brian for a second to talk about the process and how we conducted the proceedings of the meetings over the year. Brian?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'll be brief. Marcus and Martin already covered some of the background. But as Marcus said, this best practice forum was conceived, sort of decided upon by the multi-stakeholder advisory group in April, and we had our first few meetings that spring. I think we had, it says seven in the slides, and we had more than that, about 10 in total. Our first few meetings were about asking the community what we wanted to do with this best practice forum, what might be most useful to the multi-stakeholder community that we had. For those that don't know much about best practice forums, we convened our meetings on WebEx platforms. We had a dedicated mailing list where everyone was able to subscribe and exchange views there. This is the similar process to the other best practice forums. We built upon the work of the SPAM and CSERT's best practice forums, which took place over the last couple of years. That sort of knowledge that we built was extremely useful. Vout is a friend and colleague, and he led a lot of that work, so we're really appreciative to him for that. We decided early in the process that the community wanted to have a multi-stakeholder dialogue, including all stakeholder groups, on how to engage and communicate with each other when it comes to cybersecurity issues. You know, clearly very broad, but that seemed to be what the community wanted. As Marcus said, there was sort of agreement that they wanted the process to be long-term, so sort of ideas could bubble up and we could take forward different threads in different ways. We then sent out a call for contributions using the IGF website and other channels to solicit inputs from all stakeholders. We got some very good feedback. We asked questions like, what are the typical roles and responsibilities of your stakeholder groups in making the internet a secure and safe place for people? What are the typical communication mechanisms between stakeholder groups? How can cooperation and collaboration be enhanced? And what are some of the common problem areas? We list some of the contributors here. You know, we had a diverse range of contributions, many of which these organizations and individuals are here with us today, and we thank you for that. From civil society, from business, from technical community, from government. So that was really great. So just quickly some of the feedback, but what we want to do in this session is to allow the actual contributors to explain a bit more about their perspectives, and then leave it up in the second half of the session to those that might not have been involved yet. I think Martin mentioned already that there is a review platform that's open for public comments on the IGF website, which has the draft output document there, and we think it's a pretty good space for everyone to read it over, contribute, come up with even new ideas for the future. So please, we invite everybody to visit that. oh. Oh, okay. Summary of the dialogue. So some of the things we heard quickly. The involvement of all stakeholders in handling cybersecurity is essential. All stakeholders must understand, respect, and trust one another's expertise and competencies. The term, the definition cybersecurity is often loaded with context and associated with government or commercial solutions. It was said by many that the IGF actually offers an opportunity to redefine it as a common goal and to work towards a common understanding of cooperation when it comes to cybersecurity. It clearly means different things to different stakeholders, and roles and responsibilities of stakeholders are evolving. There we go. The debates around cybersecurity have rapidly broadened and place an important focus on policy that requires input from multiple stakeholders. It was said by some that initiatives should be built on democratic, multi-stakeholder processes, ensuring meaningful and accountable participation from everyone. It was said that the community must promote robust, effective, and timely information sharing among stakeholders. Cooperation and collaboration is key, so as to not duplicate work. Within the CSIRT community specifically, automating information exchange and setting expectations around the use of shared information was seen to be critical. I'm going the wrong way. Okay. So I think next we can pass it back to Martin and allow some of the contributors to share exactly what they said.
Thank you very much for that great overview of findings. One thing I'd like to stress is that when you look at these slides, what you see is a reflection of what is in the actual text. The actual text is a little bit more dense, but that didn't really fit very well on a computer screen. So I'd highly recommend reading through the materials, also seeing how the group came up with certain recommendations, because there was a lot of vibrant discussion that was being contributed, which was really helpful to then distill it into these outcome statements. So highly recommend reading the actual text and going through it in detail. Now, what I'd like to do next is have a look at some of the comments that were submitted as part of the review platform. So, as Marcus mentioned earlier, the review platform has been open now for a little bit over a month and has been open for comments from everyone. And we've done our best to advertise this to as many different forums as possible, both within government, technical community, academia, civil society, and other stakeholders that have an interest in this particular area. We received a number of interesting comments, and I have them here. And what I'd like to do is walk through each of the comments and then give the group the opportunity to provide some very brief comment, especially if you see anything that is a topic worthy of further debate instead of simple inclusion. The very first submission that we received was from Adam Bacchus, who submitted that in terms of collaboration and cooperation between those with the knowledge and skill sets necessary to improve the security of the internet, implementation of vulnerability coordination and bug bounty programs seems like a key function which thus far hasn't been explicitly called out in this text. Any entity which is responsible for protecting data should have a process in place by which they can acknowledge and fix identified vulnerabilities in their infrastructure as reported by external entities. This allows organizations to scale their efforts towards identifying vulnerabilities in externally facing properties, as well as provides invaluable data on where their existing security processes have failed and need improvement. So a contribution by Adam Bacchus that some more attention in the text on how to deal with reports of security vulnerabilities would actually be a useful addition. Is there any discussion or comments from participants or speakers here today? Okay, you will also have the opportunity to still comment on the mailing list even after the session. The next comment that we received was from Usuarios Digitales, and my apologies if my pronunciation isn't really on top. And the comment was that it is important to make conscience about cybersecurity in the people, and the only way to do that is showing them in real time how insecure could be an internet provider, a social network, a PC, a mobile device, etc. In Latin America, the people have a poor cybersecurity knowledge, and for this, everyone could be exposed to be hacked or personal information stolen. It is important to make more campaigns about cybersecurity issues and how easy it is for a cybercriminal to steal or hack a device or system. The governments around the world should be working more together on this topic. The IGF should have more of these spaces and workshops to work with all ages people that have to know that their devices or personal data are under risk and the easiest way to fix it. So a great contribution that security awareness is key to actually building a secure internet ecosystem. I will add that at the very beginning of the effort, the issue of user awareness was raised and was considered during the discussions. And based on this comment, we can definitely look at whether we can include some of those initial comments in the final outcome document. Are there any comments or discussion on this topic? Yes, Isabel.
Yeah, I think this point is very important. Just one thing, it says the governments around the world should be working more together on these topics, and I think governments are certainly an important stakeholder here, but I think there's already a lot of organizations actually doing a lot of good work in this space, so maybe one could work on the text and saying, you know, there are these initiatives and maybe we can find certain ways to bring them to the fore, provide better funding for certain initiatives and so on, just as a side comment.
Thank you.
Just a quick administrative note for the speakers. When you take the floor for the first time, can you please introduce yourself? So Isabel and also Martin, I think I should have introduced you. But
okay, I'm sorry. I'm Isabel Skierka, and I'm from the Digital Society Institute, where I'm a researcher on cybersecurity and digital policy issues, and I'm based in Berlin.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Isabel. Any other comments on this one? Then I will move on to the next, and that's also from Usuarios Digitales. Actually, no. Sorry, that is the same comment. Okay. The next comment is actually from Zihaur Rahman, and he or she had three individual comments, which all relate to the implementation of UUID, which has also been a topic of discussion at this IGF. And really, when you read the context of where the comment is provided, this is more about unique identification of individuals, which then makes it easier to identify specific discussion and specific sources of discussion. One thing that I would argue here is that since this is about a specific technology, I think it would benefit the document to focus on the underlying issue that's being addressed rather than an individual technology or solution for that problem. I don't know if we have the submitter either as a participant here or a remote contributor. Do we? If not, are there any direct comments on this proposal? Okay. Then I think what we will do is engage with the submitter and try to understand better what the root issue is that he or she is trying to address as part of the comment, and we'll see if that's something that deserves further discussion on the mailing list. And then we have one more submission, also from Usuarios Digitales, and that is that in Ecuador we have a CCERT, but until today it does not work as it should be. We still have cybersecurity issues that are not being reported by the civil society and our CCERT. It is poor in resources and not very open to listen to the society. Maybe in this IGF we could be guided to another countries or CCERTs that works together with the civil society. One initial comment, as part of the BPF on CCERT, there was actually some documentation on roles and responsibilities of individual CCERTs, and I think some of that material can be useful here as well. We can have a discussion on the mailing list whether that's worthy of inclusion in this document, but I think some of this has already been addressed in previous years. Are there any comments on this contribution? Do people think this is valuable to include again in this year's document? Okay, if there are no comments, then we will actually move on to the speakers that we have here. And I'm very proud to have a wonderful panel of experts in the area and both in adjoined areas to cybersecurity that are going to contribute some of their thoughts. First of all, we have Richard Leaning from RIPE NCC. We have Matthew Shears from the Freedom Online Coalition, and he also ran a feeder workshop earlier this week on inclusiveness of security policy communities, which he will be contributing here as well. So he'll have 2 contributions. Then we have Isabel Skierka from the Digital Society Institute, Grace Gitaiga from Kiktanet, Belisario Contreras from the Organization of American States, and Hiroshi Isaki from the Board of Trustees of ISOC. And we'll get started with Richard, because I know he has a fairly dense agenda today and he might have to leave a bit early. Richard, over to you.
Good morning. Richard Lean from RIPE NCC. Just a bit of context to why I'm sat here. Before I was in the RIPE NCC in the technical community, I was a law enforcement officer for 30 years dealing with cyber crime. So I have an interest on both from my previous employment and what I do now. And the first thing I would like to say is, what is cybersecurity? I know that's been mentioned many, many times, but what is cybersecurity? And what's interesting to me is that the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK, which is a UK-funded stakeholder engagement organisation, have actually came out with a glossary on the 23rd of November, because we don't even know what cybersecurity is ourselves, so we have to write it down to let people know what is cybersecurity. And I'll just quote you what they're saying cybersecurity is from the UK's perspective. The protection of devices, services and networks, and the information on them from theft or damage. That is what the UK believe cybersecurity is. If you speak to a law enforcement officer, they will say something different. So on this best practice forum, for me, what I would like to get at is exactly what it is that we are doing, because it's like saying, let's have a best practice forum on solving crime. Are we talking drugs? Are we talking murder? Are we talking, what are we talking? Cybersecurity is massive, it encompasses everything, so we really need to narrow down what it is that we want to let people know and how to make our little bit of our involvement help the ecosystem of cybersecurity. The thing I liked, which came up now, is that everyone's concentrating on things but not on the human beings that are using those things. And every investigation I was ever involved in as a law enforcement officer had a human element of error or misunderstanding or something in there that allowed the crime to happen. So maybe tweaking it around, that cybersecurity, maybe we should concentrate on the human being, the educational part, the awareness, the cultural changes of businesses, companies, of how their employees look after the devices and the things that they secure their companies from being attacked by cyber criminals, because that's what we're talking about in infrastructure. So that's, I do apologize, I do have to leave in 25 minutes, but I will stay here as long as I can and answer questions either now or online or through the moderator.
Thank you very much, Richard, and very important and interesting topic. That was a big area of debate, and we'll definitely talk about it later as well. Then I'd like to move on to Matthew from the Freedom Online Coalition, who will contribute a bit about his feeder session that he ran on Monday, so on day 0 of the IGF.
Thanks, Martin. I'm not actually from the Freedom Online Coalition, so just to clarify that, I'm actually the co-chair of the Working Group 1 of the Freedom Online Coalition. I'll come back to that and speak to that a little bit later on. I'm actually with the Center for Democracy and Technology. We had a feeder session on day 0 that was very well attended in a very small room. But the purpose of that session was really to understand how we can encourage and bring about multi-stakeholder engagement in cybersecurity processes. So it was not only an opportunity for the Best Practice Forum Cyber members to talk about their experiences, but also to try and tease out some learnings in terms of why they were successful or what the challenges were and how we can take those forward as a part of the BPF generally. So just to give you a couple of quick examples. We heard a lot about capacity building. We heard from the Dutch government on the Global Forum for cybersecurity expertise. We heard from different governments, including India and Canada, on how various processes are becoming open in the cybersecurity space, recognizing at the same time there are still many limitations in terms of participation. We heard from the Council of Europe on the value of engaging with more stakeholders and how sometimes that can actually lead to breakthroughs in terms of some of the issues that they're addressing. We had representation from the OAS, and Belisario will speak in a bit. We heard from Nigeria where, again, there's some progress being made in terms of opening up to stakeholders, but again, so much more can be done, and I think we got some great learnings from the experience from Nigeria. And then we also heard from ISOC on the importance of collaborative trust and security, and how important that is as a fundamental basis for stakeholders working together. We talk about trust, but we don't actually understand how important it is and how difficult it is to gain, and I'll come back to that when I talk a little bit about the Freedom Online Coalition. Some of the learnings were interesting. One of the major learnings, I think, for everybody around in the room was that we have to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of the other stakeholders, right? We have to be able to understand in a way what was just mentioned, which is we have to understand what we're talking about by cybersecurity. Can we put ourselves in the shoes of other stakeholders to understand what their angle is on a particular issue we're trying to understand and deal with? There was comments about recognizing there are limitations. We have to be realistic that multi-stakeholderism isn't a solution in and of itself in the cybersecurity space. It's one of a number of tools, and there will still be multilateral discussions. It's not all going to be multi-stakeholder going forward. There were some cautions about the notion that multi-stakeholderism is equal to public-private cooperation, and that's certainly not the case. And people said that we need to be careful that that we don't make the mistake of assuming that that's the case, and that we need to really come to these meetings. And again, I'll come back to this a little bit later. With an open ear and not a closed mind. I mean, in a way, we stakeholders tend to come in with a position that they've had for a long period of time. It may be, in fact, antagonistic, and that's not the way to get to agreement or to make multi-stakeholderism work in cybersecurity, particularly given that it's such a sensitive space and so related to national security. So let me stop there, but I think there are a whole number of learnings that came out of that we'll capture and feed into the BPF, so we can build on those going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. Those are great outcomes, and it was a really insightful session on Monday. Then we'll move on to Isabel Skierka of the Digital Society Institute.
Okay. Well, that was an introduction. So, no, don't worry. Yes, so just to say, I've read the document only a couple of days ago for the first time, and I think it's actually an amazing document, very important process here at IGF, since I think the topic of cybersecurity has come in quite recently, as I understand. So I want to start off with the same issue that actually Richard raised. What does cybersecurity actually mean? And I think there's actually good definitions in the document already from some of the contributors. And we really need to distinguish between different forms of security, right, such as national security or the technical security of systems when we talk about the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. So what is going to be protected and who is going to be protected, right? Those are really important issues. If we talk about issues such as encryption technologies and the use of encryption technologies, this can be framed as a national security issue, but it can also be framed as a public security and individual security issue. And this just illustrates how important it is to involve all these different stakeholders with their respective stakes in these discussions, how we should deal with that and what kind of policy should be made. But I think one important point here is, and maybe that's, let's say, more German or European perspective, the government in Germany or in Europe still has most power in regulating technologies, right? So we, for example, recently adopted an IT security law that makes information sharing mandatory and information sharing on incidents. So it's very important to recognize that not all stakeholders have the same powers, and some have regulatory powers that are actually written down by law, and they will be the ones that decide. So I think engagement with these stakeholders is very important, and I just want to reiterate one point from the meeting from Monday, which was brought up, which is you really need to listen to each other. And often people just, go right into the room, start talking, start, telling their own positions. But I think the first step should always be to listen, even if you're a civil society activist, you have your opinions about encryption. Law enforcement agencies have very different challenges that they face, and so we need to, this also means multi-stakeholderism, right? That you actually find a compromise sometimes too, and that might not always work with you. For example, when it comes to really defining strict legal requirements under which governments can surveil criminal suspects. So I think what matters a lot in these processes is trust, and this is why this listening and engagement is very important. I think awareness also matters a lot. We brought that up earlier. So awareness and actually having a stake, being able to formulate that stake is very important. And then obviously for many stakeholders to organize and to voice their concerns is a very important issue here. I don't have much time, but I just want to mention a couple of, I was asked to share my personal experience as well, and from the German perspective, let's say. So I think multi-stakeholderism in our country, in Germany, does not work well necessarily when it comes to cybersecurity. We just adopted a new strategy, which was not even discussed in Parliament, and that was, I think we could have done a better job here or the government could have involved at least the Parliament to discuss this strategy and to get more views into cybersecurity strategy that we just adopted. An interesting kind of process that you might have heard about is the NSA Inquiry Committee and the Parliament. After the Snowden revelations, the German Parliament started an inquiry commission into the NSA scandal and how German intelligence agencies cooperated with the NSA. We found out a lot more about our own intelligence agencies than about the NSA in this committee, but it did lead to a reform of our intelligence processes, and it's quite an interesting process because there were open meetings convened every week for people to attend and to follow discussions on the NSA Inquiry Committee, whereas, of course, also some of the documents were held private. And yeah, I'll just share some other perspectives maybe later because time is running out.
Thank you, Isabel. Some great insights actually about government engagement there as well. Next, we'll move over to Grace Kitaiga of Kiktanet.
Okay, I guess I'm a latecomer in this, but since I was also asked to share my experiences in how we're working with it, I would like to first point out that we are constantly seeing an increase in cybersecurity incidents, and especially through mobile money transactions, which is something that practically a lot of people are utilizing that. We are also seeing that in bank systems and in government systems, but above all, online platforms being used for terrorism and recruiting Al-Shabaab, recruiting young people to join the Al-Shabaab movements. And therefore, what that means is that it's presenting this is presenting challenges that not a lot of people are prepared for. And so what we have seen is some knee-jerk responses in the form of legislation that is just sprung without consultation with relevant stakeholders. And therefore, this also brings with it a challenge of balancing between the legitimate need to have security and safe and secure online platforms and freedom of expression issues. So then and that also has meant that anybody who thinks can do legislation is coming up with one. So we have multiple legislations that don't speak to each other, that don't show how, what's the nexus and how they will all tie together. And people are left wondering which one, which one are we going to follow? We've even seen bodies that have prosecutorial powers getting into policy formulation, and that is not in their mandate. And I think this then shows the complex face of what cybersecurity is all about. We have weak structures and, like I said, lack of coordination on cybersecurity frameworks. And in those who are supposed to handle cybersecurity concerns, they are under-resourced, as well as really, knowledge gap capacities. Because how do they deal with this? How does a country, say, of 40 million experiencing cybersecurity concerns report to a team of 8 people? 8 people who are also trying to understand the sector and still informed by the traditional security mechanisms of how they should handle security. And so the first response is, I think, shut down, or, we just need to come up with very strict measures. Our SATs also are not proactive. So they wait until you report, and when you report, sometimes it takes 21 days to get a response. And the scenarios, you can play the scenarios within 21 days. What would happen? Systems can collapse, or, further advanced attacks on systems would happen. Then, in terms of the whole investment on human resource, you have very bright young people handling the systems, but you're also not looking into how you will capacitate them so that they feel comfortable not to get into fraud. So, you've trusted them with bank systems, with security systems, but you're not looking into their salaries, you're not looking into where they live. So what happens? They become creative, and they're actually participating in some of these crimes on cyber. So what that means is that, and what our experience has been, there's clearly a need for a multi-stakeholder approach, because everyone is affected in this. It's not just one arm that can regulate or come up with laws on how we operate on the security. And everyone who is affected then needs to give their views so that we sort of try and build some form of consensus on how we approach this and how we move forward. And I would like to say that as KICTANET, we're also working with global partners to, we've developed a framework, a multi-stakeholder framework that we would want to start testing when it comes, even to cybersecurity issues, and we will even be sharing with, like a few of African countries that have been identified are into this partnership. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Grace, for sharing some very, very concrete issues that you're seeing and some of the ways that you see forward to solve them. Next up is Belisario Contreras from the Organization of American States for his opening statement.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much for the invitation to the BPF. It's my first time to be here. First, I would really like to point out that, cybersecurity is now part, or has been part of the agenda for a couple of years of the IGF, because it's totally relevant for the internet governance, internet infrastructure. Cyber threats, again, are a big threat for the internet stability, for democracies, and for our fundamental rights. Sometimes I'm not sure if people forget that and just get into the technical aspects. And these threats are originated by criminal and terrorist organizations, or sometimes individuals. We need to be aware that these organizations or these individuals, they are organized, and they are bad people, and we represent the good people, which are the governments, the private sector, the civil society, the technical community, sometimes we forget that these organizations are acting and are organizing in velocities like much faster than us. So as we were discussing in the session in day 0, it's very important to begin finding common understandings, middle grounds, in order to advance the agenda and in order to actually be able to face those threats. It's important to understand, in order to organize ourselves and to move forward, that cybersecurity could mean different things in different regions. Cybersecurity for someone could actually have great lines with cybercrime, with cyber terrorists, with several things. And not just regions, but actually countries, and between countries, actually different actors. That common and simple understanding is fundamental in order to move forward in specific actions. I really like Matthew comment about put yourself on the other shoes. It's totally difficult, but it's essential for any kind of negotiation. And again, in order to find any kind of agreement. From our experience, I believe that different actors, at least in the region that we work, there is a space and there is much need to be done. I totally agree, for example, with the comments that they were provided by civil society organizations in the BPF. We found out in a report that actually we mentioned yesterday that in the region there is a lack for awareness campaigns, and that was raised by the Usuarios Digitales, but actually that could be an initiative that could be promoted by NGOs. I see looking here at Michael Kaiser, who works with NCSA and actually has a really close partnership with DHS. And I was mentioning that to other organizations that it will be very important to promote that kind of partnerships in other countries. The private sector, of course, to have more openness with governments and with the technical community. You are the ones who maybe have more updated and latest information. The civil society and the technical community maybe have a little bit more of openness and actually try to focus on graded cybersecurity things. There are sometimes very specific focus that are really, really relevant, really important, like privacy, freedom of speech. But there are actually other topics, like critical infrastructure protection, that could be really relevant for our lives and could affect all the internet infrastructure. And of course, governments. The government representative needs to be more open and be more willing to cooperate and to work with all stakeholders. Those are like the remarks I have prepared for this. But in summary, there is much to be done. But again, we need to recognize that we need to find agreements and move on, because criminals are already moving a step forwards.
Thank you very much, Belisario. Our next speaker is Hiroshi Isaki from the Board of Trustees of ISOC. If we could briefly switch to the slides again, because he has a few slides that he would like to share.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. This is Hiroshi Isaki from Japan. I totally agree with all of the speakers' discussion. So I tried to introduce about our experience in Japan from the grassroots activity as well as top-down. That's the conjunction with those two together. Okay, go ahead. Okay, as a head of the wide project, we are working with Japanese government high level as well as grassroots, every single industry who work in the internet. So those are the identified, activity Mashi mentioned about ISOC. So I thrown away the hat of the ISOC now, going to the Japanese way. So this is the thing we're sharing with the Japanese government high level, with as well as every single industry, who are going to the IT native IoT society. That is the view we are sharing with every single minister or every single business players. When we think about IoT, they love to develop own silo. They love closed open source, development. So we need interoperability for the future. Even though they now have in the silo business model, that's always the case. They got money, right? Though in the future, that's going to be connected. So in order to make in such a situation, interoperability is a very important factor to do. That's we sharing with IAB and ITF. The second one is IoT without security by on silo. That's a solution they tend to do. Anyhow, they are connected to the internet in the future. So we need a security by design principle for the engineers who designed every single system, every single equipment. That is we sharing with everybody. And also this is yet another activity running by the Internet Governance Conference Japan. 10 basic key ideas for security for the internet. Sorry for the very, very small font. So first one is thinking globally, implementing locally measures. That's simply respecting practice and principle, meaning we really love running code. We really hate just a theory, just an idea. We're respecting the implementation, even for the security business. Third one is the, instead of the restriction or enforcement of security policy, supporting the improvement of activities of the human being or business. And overprotection from the security point of view is not a good idea. How we making security is the improvement, or let's say they want to do about security. That way, security measures is investment to quality improvement and the future investment to society. That is idea we want to share every single player from the government officers as well as the usual engineers or users. Sharing the operational knowledge experience is quite important. That is sharing idea using the internet itself or using the system. Protection supporting the person who experienced a cybersecurity incident as a victim rather than the bad guy. That's always we facing, especially in the private companies. So that's leading to the transparency. So in order to make it transparency, we respecting them as a victim. The presumption, that's the last one. The last one is the first self-help, next mutual assistance, finally public assistance. That's really the grassroots way. When every single person realizes that's the issue of you, then people start to work. Then the last thing is by government. So that is basically we are sending to the Japanese government as well as the Japanese every single person or me. The last slide I want to share with you is the every case how to make an intention to invest on cybersecurity. That is always people are thinking about. Does not improve the business profit and no benefit when there's no incident. That's always you experiencing, and that's a voice always I hearing. Too restrictive rule regulation decades productivity or efficiency. That yet another the reason why people don't want to have a serious security policy. And then tend to think about let's disconnect our system from the internet. So how solve this particular problem? Produce profit by big data operation or big data functions generated by the cybersecurity system as a gift. Important thing as a gift. So I have many experience regarding that. So that is a real business model. People tend to give money into cybersecurity. And also last one I'm going to share with you is a Japanese old guy saying, economy without moral ethics is crime. Without cybersecurity is bad. It's almost crime now, right? Though a moral or ethics without economy is silly talk. So that is, we always think about that. Not always say that is must. that is leading to the future benefit, future profit. That is the thing I try to share with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hiroshi-san. I think that was a great setting the tone, really, of the gift that the internet is that we're actually all trying to protect. So thank you for that contribution. Now, to open up the debate, I'd actually like to start off with definition, because we talked about it a bit earlier. We definitely talked about it very much as part of the Best Practices Forum. And I'm going to put a contentious, potentially, statement out there, and that's that we can either have very solid definitions and have no real discussion and society stays a bit the way it is, or we can be in a situation where the definitions are a little bit vague, which is probably where we are today, where discussion and ongoing interaction and building of trust and relationships is a necessary prerequisite to getting something done. And so I'm kind of interested in what the panelists and the other participants have as ideas with regards to what is better. Do we really need very solid definitions today, or are we actually in a stage that gives us tremendous opportunity for learning? Is there anyone who would like to provide some initial thoughts on that? Okay. Great.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to say something concerning that in terms of having a position on the definition of cybersecurity. I think we really have to be careful in coming up with a particular definition on cybersecurity, because every country has a perception of what cybersecurity is all about. And I think what we might probably advise is that we should allow country to probably come up with their own definition of cybersecurity. Let me use Nigeria as an example. We have a vision, and that vision is anchored on the definition of our cybersecurity. And now I think what we can do is to provide a framework of understanding so that we can have a kind of practices such that at the international level we can have a cooperation and understanding that respect local definition of cybersecurity. What is cybersecurity to US is different from what the cybersecurity is to Russia. So I just want us to be guided. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oshigun. And Oshigun is also the co-chair of the BPF this year. And maybe if you want to mention your affiliation as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm Segun Olugbile. I'm a member of the Nigerian Cyber Crime Advisory Council. I had a privilege to be part of those that developed the National Cybersecurity Strategy. And one of the experiences I would like to share has to do with the issues of building a multi-stakeholder trust platform. And learning from what we've done so far, Nigerian situation is actually very peculiar because we have a National Security Advisor Office that has been mandated by the provisions of law to drive cybersecurity in the country. And you know that anything that has to do with our office, they are extremely regimented environment. So they don't usually like to share information and all that. But however, by providence, when we were engaged, the first thing we communicated across to the NSA that, see, it cannot be as usual. This is not the document or a strategy you can probably develop and you expect that the stakeholders will follow. Now, what we did is to have, first and foremost, the interagency understanding of cybersecurity. We brought all the agencies of government that are critical to the cybersecurity in the country together, and we ensure that they have an understanding and they had a position on what cybersecurity is all about. Then we took it from there. We actually visited the domain of the private sector. I'm talking about the main operator, and we also retrieve an understanding. You know, we obtain a commitment and their position on what they feel like saying when it comes to cybersecurity policy. Someone said earlier that one of the best ways to really address the issues of trust is to put ourselves in the shoe of the stakeholders. And another thing we have done successfully is that we also create a kind of domain for civil society too, so that that particular group can also come up with their own definition of cybersecurity. At the end of the day, we harmonized all the definitions, and we came up with national vision or a position on cybersecurity. And the lesson learned is that, you see, we must open the door for a inclusive participation, whether military, whether security, whether civil society. There is something that we have in common. We all want to be secure, and we all want to be protected. I think I should stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And some interesting ideas there around definition initially as well, as in having countries also define what is important to them, come up with their own definitions. Isabel, I saw your hands going up as well. Did you have?
Yes, so firstly, I'd just like to point out that even for the term security, there are like millions of definitions that we could probably come up with, just, you know, as setting this in relation to other definitional struggles. And so my proposition would be to, whenever in the document you can be more precise with the term, for example, saying information security or IT security, if you really mean, you know, only the IT security, the security of IT systems and networks, or information security, obviously having a more broad scope than IT security involving, you know, organizational security as well. I think that is already a good step forward, and you wouldn't need to define cybersecurity as an all-encompassing term. And maybe it makes sense not to necessarily define cybersecurity in very rigid ways. I agree with the other speaker. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Matthew.
Yes, thanks, Matthew Shears. So I'm just going to say a couple of things on the Freedom Online Coalition Working Group 1 work, which is a working group that was brought together under the Freedom Online Coalition grouping of countries to really look at cybersecurity and human rights and the intersection between them. And this is important because as a part of that work, we've drafted a set of recommendations on how cybersecurity policies should be human rights respecting by design, which is quite a step forward when you think about the space that we're talking about and trying to bring human rights into the cybersecurity space. So I urge you to go look at those. They have been supported by the US government, the Canadian government, the Dutch government, the Freedom Online Coalition, numerous civil society organizations and businesses, and you can access those at freeandsecure.online. But the important point to the issue of definitions is that we also went through in the working group through the same process of trying to understand what cybersecurity is. And I think at some point in time somebody said, well, not only is there a huge range of definitions for security, but for cybersecurity somebody said there are something like 400 different definitions. So what was interesting for us in our working group was that it was very difficult to find any single reference to the importance of human rights in a definition of cybersecurity. So to add to those 400 definitions, we've drafted a definition of cybersecurity and human rights, which I urge you to look at. But I think it raises an interesting point, which is at the end of the day, I don't think we necessarily want to define it too. We want to define it, I agree with the way that Isabel said, but I think we need to be very careful about this because it's such a fluid space. Technological advances are going to change this definition most likely over the next 10 years, say. And I think we're going to need that flexibility to be able to discuss all the issues. And even in this group, it is important to define cybersecurity, but it shouldn't limit the work of the BPF. We have to be careful here because the value of the BPF is that we've seen in the few submissions that we have so far, and I'm hoping there'll be many more, we've seen a great diversity, and in that diversity there's great value. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. Belisario.
Thank you. And I want to echo the comments from our colleague from Nigeria. There is a principle that is self-determination that is very important to take into consideration. Our experience when we are developing, where we are working with countries on the development of national policies or national strategies, they go through the same process of Nigeria, is that they get into what is cybersecurity for them. To give you a very simple example on specific things, in terms of certs, which is a very technical component of a cyber plan. There are countries in the Americas where a computer incident response team might be at the national police or the federal police, or where it could be at the presidency office, or where it could be at the regulator's office, or where it could be handled by the defense ministry. Actually, we had the opportunity in organizations that the Caribbean member states, which are 14 countries, brought to the organization the issue of cyber defense. So it's very important to have very, very present that countries have the right to self-determination, and that each country can determine, can say, this is what cybersecurity means for us. And it's very difficult to say this is cybersecurity for everyone, because the realities in Africa are not particularly the same that in the Caribbean or Latin America or in North America. So it's very important to understand cultural, economical, and social aspects of our nations. It's not just about technical issues, but actually about all these other realities.
Excellent point. Thank you. Hiroshi-san.
I fully agree with the discussion about the having a common language or a definition of the cybersecurity or whatever. The reason why we made a document I shown was very core common reference in common language the other industry could refer to. So the document is very simple and showed. Then we expected every single person, every single industry referring to that document and making their own business domains, documentation, that is reference to their own requirement or situation or direction they want to do. So they can coming back to the common document, the common idea, sharing by us. So I think the BPF should have those, documentation everybody could reference to in order to making a detailed documentation or, kind of thing afterward.
Thank you. So being from the technical community, and Marcus mentioned earlier that I neglected to introduce myself. So, do we have a remote? Oh, okay. Being from the technical community, Marcus mentioned earlier that I neglected to introduce myself. I'm with the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, which is a group of security teams from across various sectors. One of the things that we as engineers tend to like is some definition, and it's challenging to merge, I think, the point of view where you have very loose definitions across communities and you have that ongoing discussion and debate to get to a point that better clarifies actually the intent of cybersecurity as well. And then you have communities where really, if there isn't a clear definition on and subsequent roles and responsibilities that fit in with those definitions, it becomes sometimes a little bit challenging to work together and to cooperate. Have you seen issues before, or have you seen concerns, and how have you worked to address those? Any thoughts on that? Yes, from the gentleman over there. And if you could please briefly introduce yourself as well.
Yes, my name is Duncan Hollis. I'm a professor of international law at Temple University in Philadelphia. I think if you can agree on a definition relatively quickly and simply, it's an excellent starting point. I think one of the things we've seen in cybersecurity, particularly in the interstate domain, is an inability. The Russians and the United States, for example, have had a track 1.5, track 2 effort to try and do this for several years. So, I mean, it then begs the question of, do you need the definition to move forward? And so I guess the one contribution I'd make is to suggest that there are alternative ways to think about this problem, and the two other ways you could categorize instead of a definition is, what are the risks, right? Can you catalog the risks and then look for shared senses of risks? Do we agree on certain risks that we want to all address in a global setting? And then also values. What is it we want to do or have done, and can you find some alignment along those lines? And there are all alternative ways of breaking open the conversation rather than continuing to kind of say, my definition's the better definition, your definition is wrong because. Just a thought.
Excellent, thank you. And I'd like to jump to Wout quickly, who also has a contribution.
My name is Wout Natris. I run my own consultancy, and as Brian said, I did the CSIRT and unsolicited communication working groups in the past 2 years. When we're talking about the definitions, we can also get stuck in them, I think. And no matter whether you're a state, a private person, civil society, or a company, you're trying to protect something. And if you take a helicopter view of that, then everybody is abused by vulnerabilities that are actually in the systems that you operate. And then you have a common denominator, whether you're Russian, Chinese, or American, or Dutch like I am, because I'm being attacked by something that I can't control in most instances. So around the world, you can see that there are several initiatives at this moment that try to take on a specific angle of cybersecurity. And whether that is the vulnerability disclosure that ethical hackers try to bring forward to states or national cybersecurity centers or companies. It's also initiatives that work on botnet mitigation that actually have some excellent best practices for the rest of the world. So that could be invited in. There are people working on safer software that could be invited in to discuss how actually are you approaching it in your country. So that could be an aim for next year if I'm looking forward, that you could bring in people who are actually trying to do something from a national or regional or global that everybody could profit from, because you could implement best practices and then everybody's exactly at the same level at some point in time, I think. So that's my contribution. Thank you. I've got a neighbor who's going to introduce himself.
Sure.
Hello, my name is Juan Gonzalez. I'm with the United States Department of Homeland Security, Office of Cybersecurity and Communications. And I do second the others' opinions about restricting yourself to just one cybersecurity definition because of the different contexts around the world and the different governments. I think that the gentleman from Nigeria and others provided some feedback related to let's look into best practices, let's look into existing frameworks that we can draw from and provide a more comprehensive multi-stakeholder capacity building around cybersecurity where we can all get better information from. So, thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Can I?
Yes.
Again, this is a best practices forum, and you said something that is totally right. There is a barrier between engineers or technical community sometimes, and sometimes policy or this kind of issue. This is a best practices forum, and instead of looking for a definition, we are going to get into UN, OEAS, and all these systems that a definition will take 2 or 3 years and will not get to a result. But what a best practice forum is, recognize that there could be multiple definitions, but we need to acknowledge that we need to work together whether or not cybersecurity means for a community or not, and break those barriers. I think that will be one of the best outcomes of these best practices, of this BPF, and see ways to improve that collaboration between the different communities.
Thank you, Belisario. We have a remote contribution as well. Let's jump to that one first, and then we'll take the additional comment from the back. Thank you.
Good morning. I have a question from MAPI, the Cyber Police. And the question is pursuing law enforcement objectives concerning violent extremism and terrorism really cybersecurity? Or is it another type of security? Can we separate the two?
Okay, let's hold on that one for 1 second, go to the comment on this discussion first, and then we'll jump into that one. Who was the other person at the back that had a contribution to make?
No, I was going to just follow up with what Belisario said about the definitions. And just like in the US, for example, and in areas, specific areas such as IoT, we're still trying to define that area and what security means within an IoT environment, like healthcare or maybe other areas within the critical infrastructure sectors that we deal with. So I think it's important that we look at best practices, and especially environments such as IoT that's so broad, and we're still kind of like trying to grasp around what that is. So.
Thank you. Okay, sounds good. So the remote question was whether there's any room for dealing with violent extremism online as part of the bigger cybersecurity issue. And I really like this question because we actually got it a lot as well in the CCERT BPF. It's very much tied into definition. It's very much also tied into the privacy versus security question. And I believe, Osegun, you wanted to contribute?
I just want to share. Related to that topic. Well, in Nigeria, we have a similar challenge because you have an issue of cyber crime and cyber security being put together under the same law. Now, you now have the legal experts and the IT experts contending with one another that, hey, cybersecurity is our domain, and the legal whatever is talking about cyber crime is our domain. And yet, the two contending issues, they are in the same law. Now, what I will probably suggest is that cybersecurity is much of a bigger picture. And from what we have done in Nigeria, we have classified 5 areas in which we need to approach cybersecurity. Legal is just one of them. We have the other factor, like, for example, engaging in multi-stakeholder issues and the critical information infrastructure and all that. So I think there is an intersection between terrorism and cybercrime. And there's no way you can defend without having ability to also prosecute and all that. Now, that will bring me to these issues which I was in response to that. Now, the African Union has a convention on cybersecurity. Then we have a convention on cybercrime from the Council of Europe. Now, we discovered that there has been effort to galvanize the African country to sign on to the Council of Europe on cybercrime. But when you look at the provisions of the cybercrime, it's all about prosecution and arresting the cyber criminals and all that. Fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But we also discovered that the level of support given to the Council of Europe is not being given to the Cybersecurity Convention, which is now define the ability to defend ourselves. You know, so for me, I think there is a need to really have a cooperation, a principle on cooperation and understanding. There is no way we can isolate one from one another. They need to work together. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one more contribution on this topic. Matthew? Oh, was there?
Are you going to talk on the terrorism? Or you talk on that, then I can.
Okay.
I think it's a fascinating question as well. Matthew Shears again. I think it's a fascinating question as well. I'm very concerned, however, that one can tend to look at these issues in bigger and bigger umbrellas. And the problem with that is that you may not be addressing the root issues. And I think that's where we have to be very careful about what kind of issues we're putting under this kind of cybersecurity rubric. So that would be my only comment on that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nick Shorey. I work for the UK government. First of all, thank you very much, I think, to everyone today and also sort of throughout this process. There's been some really excellent contributions. I think I've got a couple of points, if I may. First of all, on this definition, I'm inclined to agree with sort of the points that the professor over there made and Matthew just now. I think it's good to sort of, try and recognize what we're talking about. And you may come up with a definition, but it would probably end up at such a high level that it doesn't mean anything and it will be relevant today but not tomorrow. So I think actually what might be more beneficial is this idea of common values and risks and sort of the context of where they apply within each sort of element of the ecosystem. I recall I went on a pen testing course once and thought I was going to learn all these really Gucci techniques for how to hack computers. The first thing the guy taught me was physical security. For me, for the UK government, we've just published a national cybersecurity strategy. It came out on the 1st of November, and it takes a very broad approach to, first of all, sort specific security actions that we've got to take at network level, but it's also looking at how we develop an ecosystem within the UK that's going to foster the skills and the innovation that's going to allow us to be a sort of a prosperous digital economy. Some of the challenges we found over the sort of the previous 5 years are sort of things like sort of stimulating market adoption of security best practice, generating that sort of trust and engagement between parties for sort of information sharing, also sort of implementing standards. I've had the good fortune this year to do a lot of talking and meeting with people. I recall one example. I was chatting to some people at a meeting about DNSSEC, and I said, well, what's the problem here? And they said, well, the problem is, first of all, finance, the upskilling that we've got to do for our workforce, some of the technical complexities of implementing this, but also then there's the liability, because if we implement DNSSEC at a network level on our network, but then someone sort of messes it up at theirs, the whole thing goes wrong, but then the end user thinks that we're the problem. So there's all of these things. So I really think it would be a better, maybe a more fruitful approach to look at common values, risks, and then look at sort of the best practices and the specific actions that we can take. The previous forums last year on countering spam and CSERTs, they produced some really great high-level principles, and I think going forward, I'd really welcome the input of sort of all the people around the table and others to look at then how we take those forward and how we implement those. So some of the work that's been going on at the IGF in the last couple of years, where they've now have security as a fundamental principle in protocol design, and there's sort of, and then all those sort of best practices that we wrapped up, and take this step, sort of a step forward under a sort of a risk, common values based approach.
Thank you very much. With that, we actually only have about 10 minutes left in the session, and what I really would like to get out of today is to get an idea of what the community as a whole, this group of people, believes would be very interesting topics of investigation. And for that, I'd like to jump back to the slides for a second. Could we have the slides up? Thank you. No. Yes. There we go. So a couple of topics that were raised during the working group so far were that, first of all, there is room for security awareness discussion. As in, very initially, we contemplated this as a topic for debate this year. So far this year, we did not deal directly with awareness principles outside of where they were actually beneficial to, for instance, unpacking the definition a bit. User knowledge gaps were brought up, as well as child online protection and online safety. Then second, there was a definite call for more frameworks on cybersecurity, frameworks mostly around regional and global cybersecurity cooperation, civil society and government, how do those communities have opportunities to work together better, and transparency of private sector cybersecurity policies, which in some cases led to some unclarity. There was also room to talk about best practices for contractual arrangements with information security services. How do you actually work in this area as an enterprise, as an organization, as a government? And also to look into mechanisms to improve multi-stakeholder cooperation in formulating and implementing national cybersecurity goals. And then finally, there was also a discussion around development. And this is something that I've also seen come back a lot in the last week here at the IGF. Which was that there is definitely a bit of a disconnect between cybersecurity and sustainable development goals, and how can we connect those closer together, because clearly they're intrinsically connected, and there should be a nexus between the two. And then finally, the need for embedded security as broadband expands, and I think that ties into IoT, which has been brought up. There were also some suggestions today to potentially bring in more experts in a particular area and to work on that. Are there any other suggestions from the group on things that you would like to see addressed? I'll jump over to the lady over there first.
Thanks. Thanks to all the contributions to the call. I've been reading through them, and some are quite good. And thanks to the couple of sessions we've had this week already. I'm Mallory Nodal. I'm with the Association for Progressive Communications, and I'm also on the executive board of two private sector initiatives. One is an ISP and the other one is a software development firm. And I was really looking forward to reading the submissions that dealt with multi-stakeholderism within and with the private sector, because I think often in this space, especially at the Internet Governance Forum, we're talking about governments. And I think I would also just like to thank Hiroshi, because I think without his contribution on the panel today, it would almost have not been on the agenda at all. And so I'd like to offer maybe an example, just to get us started, about a best practice within it, which is the sort of the way that the internet has been built over the past couple of decades, and that's to have free and open source software, and also the concept of auditing, especially when it comes to security-related protocols and software. So I would just think, looking at the way that encryption protocols are created and adopted and then audited are really good practices, and we can investigate specific ones. And also then just the but that again often happens within the technical community. So looking at how that model can actually be, that existing model of free and open source software and development and protocols and standard settings can include more people from civil society and more involvement and support from governments. So I think that this is sort of supporting that considerations for 2017 item under transparency of private sector cybersecurity policies, but also private sector products, tools, and work in the software and protocols space. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. The gentleman over there.
I'm Michael Nelson. I do global public policy for Cloudflare, which is a web security firm protecting against DDoS attacks. I've been working in internet policy for about 25 years and have probably read about 100 cybersecurity reports. And I would urge you, as you go and try to figure out your agenda, to look at what's already been written and try not to do what everybody else has done. And I look at that list, and about half of it is stuff that other people have done, and you might do it 10% better. But I'd urge you instead to go and find spaces that people are not paying enough attention to. Last Friday, the White House Commission on Enhancing Cybersecurity issued its report, which has some very, very useful material in it, and I think it is actually the best report I've read on this topic, because there are some new things in there. One of the topics that they explored but didn't really solve is how best to organize governments to address cybersecurity. And this is a place where IGF would be uniquely qualified to show not just which countries have done national security cybersecurity strategies, but instead highlight those that are actually organized to do something about it. You have a lot of people around the room who are part of governments and could probably give some very candid remarks on how to get organized. So that's one thought. The second thought is that we tend to focus on preventing attacks. A lot of us are physicists or engineers. We're internally optimistic. We think we can solve the problem by stopping everything. We can't. There will be successful attacks. So a little more focus on best practices for responding to DDoS attacks, to particularly attacks on databases, would be helpful. And again, I haven't seen a lot in that area. And the last point, the last blind spot that I've seen in this area is with regard to insider threats. We're so fixated on the big, bad, malicious hackers that come from the outside. Depending on what you read, it's still 70 or 80% of successful security breaches are due to insiders. So best practices on addressing insider threats would be another place where you could do a lot of good. So again, just the mega message, don't do what everybody else has already done.
Thank you. We have 3 more contributions, and we are actually running out of time. So the gentleman here, if you want to use this microphone, it's probably easier.
Mine is very short. Actually, it's just a short advertisement, the one I did as well on the session on Monday. It's about a session, I will say shortly, a session today at 4:30 p.m. on room 2, and it's about cross-pollination between sort of the cyber norms community and the internet governance community. By the way, my name is Pablo Hinojosa. I work for EPINIC, and thanks.
Thank you very much. Up next is Matthew.
Thanks. Matthew Shears again. I don't want us to get distracted by definitions, but I think it's actually a really interesting topic, and maybe we can encourage people to submit definitions that they come across to the BPF, because I think it'll be a fascinating discussion going forward. We need more capacity building examples. We need more best practices of capacity building. I would urge you to look at, for example, the video series that Global Partners Digital has done on preparing, enabling activists to engage, human rights activists to engage in the cybersecurity space. That's a fantastic example of the kind of best practice that we need more of brought to this BPF. On day zero, somebody made the great suggestion, it might have been yourself actually, Martin, that we needed to capture all these very practical examples. We're still talking about examples in the cybersecurity space with regards to multi-stakeholders, and a bit theoretical. There are actual examples. We touched on a number of them on Monday, and we need to capture those and get them and get more of them. Love the idea on working on values and principles and frameworks, but a lot of work has been done on that, and we just need to be careful that we're not, as Mike says, replicating that. And then the last point on your list I think is really interesting. The one about cybersecurity and SDGs is a bit of a stretch, but that's worthy of further consideration. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. Grace, I believe you also had an addition.
It's it on? Okay. No, I just realized I'm supposed to be speaking in another session. But before I leave, I just wanted to ask: could it be possible to consider recommending the need to adopt a multi-stakeholder approach in actually coming with this cybersecurity legislation, because it's tended to be a security concern, and yet even as users we are contributing in one way or the other in the fraud or the crimes that are online. So is it possible really to just consider that? And I'm sure if one example works, others will follow. Thank you.
Excellent point. Thank you very much. Two more from... Oh, yes, go ahead. Yes.
Lady first.
No, go first and then we'll take right after.
Catherine Garcia van Gostraten from the Center of Expertise for Cybersecurity, the Hague University of Applied Sciences, the Netherlands. So I really endorse the whole list of considerations for 2017. However, obviously, given my current research, I think I truly congratulate for the one on the point of cybersecurity contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think you don't need to go that far with that, because already smart cities are, in fact, responding to this question. And therefore, I will actually propose to also focus in this, for instance, engaging top-down and bottom-up approaches to smart cities implementations, because by looking at the smart cities from that point of view, you are already sort of providing a strong focus on sustainable development goals. I give you one exact example. Rotterdam, the city of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, have already started to implement waste management systems as a smart city implementation. And although this is known as a top-down approach because it's mostly based on obviously information applications and so on, it is also looking at the bottom-up approach, meaning citizen engagement. So they have consulted with citizens in the city of Rotterdam to see which specific needs there are into the waste management system in the city of Rotterdam. So I will really put it as a strong focus on the smart cities in order to focus on sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Wout?
Thank you, Martin. I've been invited to plug my workshop session this afternoon also. It's about, the title is Let's Break Down Silos, because that's what everybody's always talking about in cybersecurity and cybercrime. What we're going to try to do is something completely different, probably than ever been done before at the IGF. We have a room full of experts who are expert in working together in one configuration or another, and we're going to try to identify within 1.5 hours what are the prerequisites, the conditions to have a successful cross-boundary cooperation. And that is something we're going to try to feed back into, the results are going to feed back into this BPF, so that that could be something which could be used as best practices or developed a little bit more, because I don't have the idea that we're going to do it all in 1.5 hours, but at least perhaps have a start. And we're inviting you all to be there, and a lot of people in this room will actually be there to share their expertise on this topic. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Wout. I think the individual next to you also had a...
My name is Lawrence. I'm a youth at IGF fellow. As much as you're talking about the policies and the frameworks we need to embrace, I think one thing we should focus on is about capacity building. I'm from Kenya. Africa's Grace, my chairlady, said that you can't have a set of 8 people trying to serve 4 million people. So as much as they might be having the policies, but there's lack of capacity building, meaning basically implementing them and putting them to ground is a challenge to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that input.
I forgot to mention the time. It's 4:30 in room 3, sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Wout. And then there was one more remote contribution, I believe. Is that correct? Okay. Okay. Yes, we'll have time for one. Yeah. Microphone. Do we have a microphone at the back here?
This is a comment and a question as to the last one from Mappy also. It says, "Hi, I'm Mappy, a cyber policeman from the early 80s, Nintendo universe. I have extensive experience in cybersecurity and law enforcement. I'm also a mouse. Firstly, I will dispute the reform made in German intelligence. Germany used to be a bastion in terms of standing up for privacy and human rights online. Now we have the government trying to block the federal court justice decisions to bring Snowden to testify in Berlin. The government is advocating for offensive hacking and cracking WhatsApp conversation. This is a step backwards that underestimates cybersecurity and will break it for us all. My questions regard to the tendency to see cybersecurity as a means of attaining other types of security, in pursuing law enforcement objectives, countering violent extremism and terrorism really cybersecurity, or is just another type of security? Can we separate the two? Should we focus so much on security by means of cyber, or are we losing focus on the individual netizen us?"
Because it's such a complex and longer topic, I think what we'll do is we'll move that discussion to the mailing list where everyone will contribute.
Can I just
and I'd
say
like
one?
to, sorry?
Can I just, because I brought
Sure.
up the point about intelligence reform, I didn't have enough time to talk about this reform, and I just want to say this was not a valued statement or anything.
Okay.
Just mentioned there was a reform.
Okay, thank you, Isabel. What I'd like to do is, because we are effectively out of time, I'd like to create a short bit of time for both of our co-chairs to close the session. And I'd also like to thank all of you for participating and providing so much input. I think this is, every year we've seen an increase in the amount of input in these best practices forums, and this was really great to moderate, and thank you all for attending. And we'll start with you.
Well, thank you for the privilege being given to me. I just have one last point to make. I want to urge you to please let us look into the best practices on regional stakeholders corporations, because we have African Convention on Cybersecurity, and other continents and regions equally have their own respective cybersecurity. So I just want to urge you, let's look at how we can have a best practice forum that can enhance harmonizations of these regional policies. Thank you.
Thank you. And to follow up on that, obviously going forward, we have to find the sweet spot for the IGF. And I think sustainable development in cybersecurity sounds very much like that. And as we said earlier, also the multi-stakeholder cooperation is definitely a sweet spot for the IGF. But this is not the end of the discussion. Tomorrow, we will feed into a main session on all the best practice forums, and there will be space for further discussions. We will present. Martin will present essentially the work done so far and the discussion today. The document will be revised, taking into account the discussions at this best practice forum and tomorrow's session. And then we will continue the discussion and make proposals to the multi-stakeholder advisory group on what we should do next year. So this is by no means can be taken as a given. There will be a decision by the MAG what will happen next year, but our discussion will continue. And please join us at tomorrow's meeting where we discuss all intersessional activities in the main session hall at 10 o'clock. And with that, I close the session and would like to thank our moderator, Martin, and invite you to give him a big hand. And thank you all for participating in this discussion.